Hello, and welcome to Soul School. I'm recording this on a rather hot day in Wales. It's been very dry, and I've noticed my voice is a bit dodgy, so I've got my glass of water here, and I might have to resort to it occasionally. So this presentation is all about writing your soul story using what I call a language of light. Now I'm going to divide the presentation into three sections. First section is called In the Beginning. The second section is about mystical alphabets as what I call soul technology. And the third section introduces you to celestial characters that come from ancient alphabets that you can use in meditation. So let me move my picture out of the way of the words down to there. In the beginning, well, many ancient stories describe how the divine, which has no form or shape, is nowhere and everywhere all of the time, forever and ever, uses sound to initiate a creative process by which the cosmos comes into being. Now, this is very familiar from biblical material, especially the Gospel of John, the fourth Gospel, begins with the words, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And the beginning of the Hebrew Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, says, "Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz," which means, translated roughly, in the beginning Elohim created the heavens and the earth. And Elohim says, "Let there be light," because there was darkness before that. So there was darkness on the face of the deep, and it had no form. So there's a void. There's nothing at all. And then the spirit of Elohim moves. And these biblical verses keep repeating how Elohim said this, or Elohim called. So Elohim is giving names, naming things. And because the names are given, the beings of fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and eventually the human beings, come into existence, but only because Elohim has spoken. So this creative process is grounded because of the speaking, because of the calling. Now, one thing that's important to note is that Elohim is plural for El. So this suggests that there are many gods involved. Perhaps the El actually requires plurality in order to make things happen, in order to make a cosmos which has got multiple layers. You need to have more than one God, or the big God needs some perhaps smaller gods to assist. And another way of translating those verses at the beginning of the Bible is not God in the beginning, God created, but the beginning created the gods, the heavens and the earth. So the initiation of activity, the beginning, becomes an initiatory activity. And by that initiation, the gods get into action. So this El is emanating multiple powers in order to fracture the primordial singular darkness into multiple layers of light energy. And this word Elohim is sometimes translated not as gods, but as strength. The El word means strength or capacity or ability. And in this creative process, these Elohim have the strength, the capacity, the ability to build fundamental structures. And their building blocks are letters, sounds, archetypes. The building blocks are called Evanim. And this is something that Jewish mystical tradition keeps repeating, that there are basic building blocks, and these are letters and sounds, and they become archetypes. And El is the suffix for the angel names, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. So, for example, Raph means healing, and El means the strength or the capacity to heal. Sometimes people would say the healing of God. And Raphael, by the way, I've just noticed, I put the date there for you, the very, very old name, goes back more than 3,000 years. So what we see here is that the angels or the powers, sometimes the judges, derive strength and capacity. They are given powers by the big one. So these strengths and powers are archetypes. And archetypes are fundamental to the divine structures, just like great pillars are in a temple or a cathedral. They're holding the thing together. And the archetypes are associated with gods in ancient mythologies, even previous to the growth of Jewish mysticism and in the Babylonian mythologies. They're associated with the planets. They become the planetary gods. And then for the Jewish tradition, they become archangels. And everyone's unique destiny or life purpose resonates with the archetypal powers which are described in your birth chart. And the best story that you can write will be one that can make use of these strengths, because you can very easily craft your story from that, which is why you need to know what they are. And that's where astrology is really useful to you. And then you discover which gods support you, which gods you have the ease and comfort with, the God that you can cozy up with to get on your side. And then you go with that. So every archetype has a kind of fractal capacity. So every process that creation goes through is repetitive on these basic patterns. And it's like a cosmic flower unfolding all the time, which is why we use the many-petaled lotus or the rose as a symbol of divine beauty, because it will unfold naturally with grace. And your life story can unfold according to the archetypal principles. So every word that you speak every word you speak aloud, or every word that you speak in your own mind to yourself, is just as divine as those spoken by Elohim. So are your own words and your own thoughts and your own ideas. Can you choose those? Can you focus them? And are they strong enough? Are they the strength to manifest a beautiful story? So I want to keep telling people and you that your destiny is not written in the stars above. You are writing it on the inner sky of your consciousness. But your capacity to create a good story depends on your understanding of what archetypal powers are easily available to you. That's why you need your birth chart. And the birth chart tells you which are the primary archetypes. In addition to that, you can discover what soul technology can enhance your capacity. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in a moment, soul technology. So now we come to the writing. The Elohim have written things, so spoken things. There are signs and there are mystical writings as well. So all the great spiritual traditions give us scriptures, and these are written texts, and they record the wisdom teachings. And these traditions tell us that speaking words aloud, or memorizing them, or repeating them inwardly, will bring us spiritual insights. And the ancient languages of Sanskrit and Hebrew are based on what are called primordial sounds. Primordial means original or coming from the beginning. They are the sounds that have been in the universe since it started. And the most ancient languages claim that that's how language for humans developed, because they could hear these sounds and they could make these sounds with the voice. And these sounds provide the mantras that you get in Sanskrit, or the way I teach this material, what I call ziras. I'll come back to that shortly. So, in the Hindu tradition, the first word is Aum. It's the primary mantra. And it's made of three sounds. Aum. And each of those sounds represents a god. It's the sound of the universe. Aum. But it's three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And this vibration it is created by atoms humming at different speeds, and they produce the humming sound. And in this beautiful image here of the three gods, we see this lotus flower, and the lotus flower has grown out of the formless reality, the transcendent reality, has allowed a flower to emerge, to unfold. And the flower is showing us these three gods. And according to Jewish mysticism, they also have a first word, which is also a primordial sound. And in this case, it's sh, om. So from that, we get the great word that many, many people use as a greeting and a blessing of well-being, shalom. But it's interesting that shalom is not just a word meaning peace. It means much more than that. It implies wholeness and completeness and well-being and all of life, everything. So that's what the greeting shalom means. The very first letter of it, which is on the right, which looks a bit like the letter W in the alphabet we normally use in the West, in Western Europe, that letter is the sh, which is regarded as the most sacred letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And talking about sounds, the scientists have this story, we could call it a myth, of a big bang. And they theorize about the beginning of everything as well. And they tell us that the Hubble telescope captures what is left over from that bang as a kind of white noise. And a white noise is primordial. It's constant background sound to the universe. So now we come to a little bit more detail about Kabbalah. So in the Hebrew Bible, there are many, many powerful spiritual experiences and mystical practices in the Jewish tradition can be dated back at least 1600 years ago. And Jewish Kabbalah only developed about 800 years ago. So although people often think Jewish Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, it's only a bit of it, but that's the most well-known. And in the 15th century CE, so a few hundred years ago, Kabbalah was adopted by Christians in the Renaissance, and they called it Kabbalah with a C. They wanted a C because that was like Christians. So Christian Kabbalah has a C. And then in the 19th century, not so long ago, it was adopted, you could say adapted. In both cases, it's adapted as well as adopted as what is known as the Hermetic Kabbalah, which is a particular way of approaching the same materials, but very much changed in the light of people who were not Jewish. They were the practitioners of Kabbalah with a C or Kabbalah with a Q were not usually Jewish people. So in the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew sounds and the characters or the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are fundamental to the creative process. As I mentioned earlier, they are regarded as building blocks. And in the Book of Formation, which is one of the older texts which the Kabbalists refer to, there's a story about God creating, which is in which they describe it as a process of engraving, just like a sculptor carves marble. And in that text, they use the word ketzavot, which means limitations. And this is very interesting because what the limitations are a narrowing down of what is allowed, the creating of boundaries. So what was boundless and infinite has to be formulated into something that is manifest. And the only way you can do that is by saying, we limit it to this. So when you want to create something, you have to say, I want this, but I don't want that. So we have to realize that every creative process is also a process of saying no to something. Yes to this, no to that. Now, there's a very close connection, a very thin line, really, between what is regarded as magic and mysticism. And we can see this in the long history of mystical practices, because the divine carves creation using Hebrew letters. And the many computations of these Hebrew letters are regarded as names for God. And by calling on these names, one takes some power in the manifested world. They are magical because they have the power to influence the natural world. So King Solomon, who was regarded as wise, was able to conjure or summon or invoke the spirits, the jinn, to create his magnificent temple. But a wise man, you see, is a magi. He's a magician. He's a wizard. And he is one who understands the power of divine naming. You name something, you have power over it. It obeys you. And there's some very clear instructions by God, the God of the Hebrew Bible, where he or it promises abundance when the divine name is repeated and the special prayer that is given is repeated. And that if you keep remembering it, if you keep a little scroll of it in a mezuzah over your door, at the front door and the doors in the house, so it's always there in your mind. And even when you're saying your prayers, you can put it in a little box called a tefillin, and you can tie it on your forehead, and you can tie it on your forearms. So there's this constant sense of being in the presence of this divine power. And following those invocations and those prayers will lead the people to abundance, to the land flowing with milk and honey. And this is why these prayers are so highly regarded and revered, because they are very, very powerful. And whatever you say and whatever you repeat to yourself or to other people has an effect. Here's abracadabra. This is an Aramaic word, and Aramaic is really another version of Hebrew, and it also has primordial sounds as a sacred language. And so famously, this is used by stage magicians. And basically, it translates as I create as I speak. So watch what you say. Watch what you say, but also watch what you think. So all the spiritual traditions insist that sounds repeated by chanting inwardly or with the voice will lead you to mystical insights. And in the mystical state of cosmic consciousness, you find that you can access these magical paranormal powers. And this is because these languages are based on primordial sounds. So by using them, you are immersing yourself in the primordial power of creation. In Sanskrit, they talk about a mantra. We mentioned the mantra Om previously, but there are many, many mantras in Sanskrit. And these repetitions will connect us back to the beginning of the universe, to the source. And the spoken mantra as well will connect us with primordial vibrations, or singing the mantra. So one of the most famous teachers of these systems using mantras was a man called Patanjali. He's around 2,000 years ago, roughly the same time as Yeshua, Jesus. And he wrote a very short text divided into 4 books of what are called aphorisms, the yogic aphorisms. And they deal with the inner science using mantras. And he talks about achieving a state of one-pointed or content-free awareness. And then the mind is stilled, and the seer, or the real self, is revealed. And in book 3, in the Powers, he describes how focusing on an object or focusing on a concept or a quality will lead to manifestation and even perhaps levitation. So the Yoga Sutras encourage us to concentrate on particular qualities, not things. So we want to manifest things. We want to follow the law of attraction, and we think, oh, we've got to think of our new holiday or our car, or we put the picture on the wall, so we're doing the same kind of manifestation process. But actually, what it is that we're really seeking are things like joy and wisdom and beauty, because those come to us out of the nature of the universe. It was Spinoza who said, joy is the feeling that arises when there's a natural flow of power, the sense of power. When you feel as though power is flowing through you, then you feel joyful because you are participating in the power of the universal flow. That's what brings joy, not the motor car, not the holiday. Those are I'm not saying you shouldn't want a car and you shouldn't want a holiday. I'm not a Puritan about that. But what I'm saying is that the joy comes from knowing that what is good for you can easily arise, whatever it happens to be. I'll just mention here that although I mostly focus in this talk about Sanskrit and Hebrew, that there was a Sufi movement based on the mysticism of letters, Harufism it's called, and that arises in Iran in the late 14th and early 15th century, so roughly the same time as Kabbalah is being shared around Europe. And for the Sufi approach, God is incarnate in every atom. In Islam, in the Quran, it is said, God is closer to you than your jugular vein. Right, so it's intrinsic in you, just as it is immanent in all of creation. And in Harufism, God is embodied in the words and in the letters of the Arabic alphabet, but also in the letters of the Persian alphabet. And they have more letters in those alphabets, 28 for the Arabic alphabet and 32 for the Persian alphabet. But in both cases, that they are the basis for all the love and all the beauty in them, which is why they place such a big emphasis on beautiful calligraphy. So when we meditate, we can move into an experience of being at one with this divine source, with El, with the source of light. And we can experience it in our body and in our mind as an intense golden light. And I've given you a quote here. It's from the Gospel of Matthew. Yeshua says, your whole body will be filled with light. And one of the most important events in the life of Yeshua is the transfiguration. I regard that transfiguration as much more significant for learning spirituality than the crucifixion. So in the Schaefer method, which I offer through Soul School as a self-study course or with support from me, I teach Zera meditation. And I use the word Zera because it's a Hebrew word meaning a seed, but we use a Zera just like a Sanskrit mantra for repetitive chanting inwardly. Just to say briefly, the way you work with Zera or a mantra is that you repeat it, but as you repeat it, it allows your attention to shift from your everyday busyness, your monkey mind, until you experience yourself as something much clearer. There's a clarity and a refreshing sense of expansion that comes because your monkey mind stops hassling around. And at that point, quite often, you don't even remember your Zera or your mantra. You just are flowing with something that's starting to come through you. And you drop into this really quiet state of awareness. And that's a place where you can make choices about what you think. Because let me just ask you to think. What you normally think just arises and you don't quite know where it's come from. But if you can get down deep into the source of your own thoughts, you can play with them and reshape what's going on in your own consciousness. This is why it's called a science. It's quite experimental. Get into a deep state of awareness. Observe what you're thinking. and say, can I choose a different thought? So the Schaefer method uses characters from a Kabbalistic alphabet, which is based on Hebrew. And this alphabet was called the Celestial writing. Celestial meaning from the stars. And you don't need any Hebrew. You don't need to know Hebrew. Although I know a little bit of Hebrew. I am not a big Hebrew scholar, but I know enough to make use of the power of these systems. And that's what I teach people. So the 22 Hebrew characters from the original Hebrew alphabet are kind of simplified. This particular symbol here, logo here, I call them logos, or characters, is based on Shin, which I showed you earlier, looks a bit like a W. So you can see that there's an energetic quality because they've been stripped back and they're presented as orbs of light and lines of light. So they're easy to memorize and they're easy to bring up into your inner visual field while you're in a state of meditation. So this is part of the process of creating your own story. You kind of check under the bonnet of your own awareness. So what are the thoughts that are going on here? And I quite like this picture because it's got all these little cogs going on, and that's how the mind is working. This thought, this thought, this thought, this thought. But if you imagine that those are mystical characters and not just chaotic thoughts, like what am I going to get for tomorrow's meal? And what time do I have to, meet my husband or collect my children or whatever? If you inject, if you like, bring into your thought processes different concepts using these logos, mystical logos, you can lead yourself towards what the Greeks called a metanoia. And this is a change of perception. It's not just a change of mind, like, oh, I've changed my mind about going to the cinema tomorrow, I'm going to do this instead. It's much bigger than that. It's like changing how you perceive the world. And once you do that, everything changes. Really significant, different way of actually being in the world. So now we come to the celestial opportunity for a new story. Now, this is an old Greek philosopher. I don't really believe it is Parmenides because I'm sure nobody knows what he looked like. But he was an early 5th century Greek philosopher, and he makes the powerful statement, which goes down in history, the thing that is and the thought of this thing are identical. And if you get into a mystical state, when you're indoors in your quiet room, or even when you're outside in the natural world, you can really understand that and have a direct realization of it. You can look at a tree, for example, and you can know that what you're thinking is a tree and the tree are the same thing. So again, this is a philosophical and metaphysical concept which tells us a great deal about how to interact with reality in a way that connects us, constantly connects us to the powerful flow of divine energy, which brings us joy. So our future is not just out there. We are co-creating as we move through time and space. We are carving our reality like the gods. And we can choose our words. We can choose our ideas. And when there are synchronicities in our lives or dreams, they can give us hints and indications as to what's going on in our deeper consciousness, which is why it's so important to observe your dreams and to question what they mean. And you can't go to a dream dictionary because everybody's dream is very personal and you won't get the answers from a book of dreams. You will have to understand them from inside. So what we're saying here overall is our awareness runs very, very deep. Our thoughts and what we say arise most of the time without our conscious decisions. And what we are saying when we communicate with people are usually based on very old experiences and our responses to what happened, when we were little, possibly what happened in previous lives. So meditation is really important because it helps to clear what I call the brambles from the inner garden. Using the concept of spiritual gardening is really useful because the mind gets very tangled in a load of rambly, thorny bushes, a bit like, the story of the Sleeping Beauty's castle, which is surrounded by all the impossible thorny bushes and hedges. And there she is asleep. Well, your soul doesn't sleep, but your mind does create a great tangle. So when we get a good meditation system, our positive thoughts can arise naturally and we feel blessed. And when we feel blessed, we can easily bless others. So the mantra or the zera is a really special way to meditate because it's so effective in allowing you to escape from monkey mind and drop into this quiet zone. And when we meet the mystical zone, when we get in there, that's when we begin to co-create using the sacred characters. So you have a nice clean slate when you get in there. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for this state of stillness, of expanded mind that feels like anything new can arise in it. And quite often your mind does feel wide and open, like a clear sky, and your body can feel expanded in a beautiful way, almost like an Alice in Wonderland way. Oh wow, I'm just getting larger and larger, because you are connecting with the universe. And that's when you can choose to write a new message. And here's another image that could be helpful. You're standing on the sand, you're well grounded, you're very stable, but in front of you is this ocean, which is vast and mysterious and endless and awesome. And The universal mind is like this ocean. It's impossible to compute. And so when you meditate and you get to this place where you are almost, you can be almost overwhelmed by the beauty of it, that is the time when you can say, now I want to create something new. So if your thoughts are arising without your conscious intention, and then you standing by the ocean and you can throw some pebbles in, you could engrave these mystical characters onto your pebble and throw it into the water. So here are just 3 of these celestial characters that you might choose to engrave on your pebble. From the right, there's Shin, which I've shown you before. So the concept that Shin carries is deep peace. And then the center logo character is Yod, or loving relationships. And the third one is Kef, which is heavenly protection. And just by looking at those briefly, I hope you will see how quickly and easily they can be conjured up in your mind once you close your eyes. And this is something that you can practice when you learn the Schaefer method. First of all, in the Schaefer method, you learn how to use the zero to take you to the right space. And then you learn how to bring the characters into your mind while you're still in a deep state of meditation. And in that sense, these characters, using them in this way, is not unlike what Patanjali introduces as the aphorisms. They are visual aphorisms, if you like, whereas Patanjali was giving people word mantras. They were in Sanskrit, of course. So just take a moment to have a quick look at those 3. So the stories that we tell ourselves about our individual lives and the stories that collectively the human race is telling itself and has been for many, many generations are stories that will create the reality that's out there. And human history will fulfill these ancient archetypal myths, some of which are not very helpful. And in your own life, your personal life, there will be myths and archetypes, some of which are not very helpful. So going into this clearing process by meditating and then introducing new concepts will allow you to write a new history book for yourself. And that will add to the collective human history. So every thought creates a ripple. Choose your pebbles with great care, because the ripple spreads beyond you. So I'm just going to close with these words about the tree of life. Because in Jewish mysticism, the tree of life is a very profound metaphysical concept. And we don't know how ancient the Kabbalistic tree of life is, but we do know that in very ancient Jewish texts, there are proverbs about wisdom being a tree of life, and describing this tree as offering length of days in her right hand and riches and honor in her left hand. And her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. So that's one of the things that people who work with me are introduced to, and that's the concept of the tree of life, which deserves another presentation, of course, because it's a big topic. But I always mention it because the Soul School logo here, you will see, is a tree. And the concept behind this logo is that if you feed the roots of the tree, you can eat the fruits of the tree. So feeding the roots is meditation. And then out of the meditation naturally grows. You remember the lotus I showed you earlier? Naturally grows out of the transcendental into and becomes immanent. And yet they are reflections of each other. So to use the spiritual gardening metaphor, you clear the weeds, you do the inner work, you feed the roots with your meditation, you create good compost, you use the healing sounds inwardly, you plant good seeds by introducing sacred characters, and then your tree of life will offer healing, joy, and abundance. So this is the Soul School pathway. You learn the Schaefer method, including zero meditation. You use the Schaefer characters to promote joy, healing, and abundance in your life. You can use the channeled angel script wisdom to access the spiritual guidance you need. Some of the work you can do entirely on your own, or you can attend Zoom classes. And I shall also be offering in 2026 face-to-face classes for what I call the Schaefer Protocols training. If you want to know more, get in touch with me at thealin.com. Many blessings, and thank you for staying with me. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Then you'll always know when I put up a new presentation. Blessings.